It is Tuesday and it is time for the story of the day. This week I've chosen a theme of fairy tales. Yesterday I read Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Today I'm going to read Hansel and Gretel. There was once a woodcutter and his wife who lived in a tiny cottage on the edge of a magnificent forest with their 2 children. They had a boy called Hansel and a girl called Gretel. It was a hard life and there never seemed to be enough food. The woodcutter's wife turned to her husband one night. "There's not enough bread for us all tomorrow," she said. "It would be best for everyone if you took the children into the forest and left them there." "But they'll starve to death!" exclaimed the woodcutter. "It's either them or us," replied his heartless wife. The woodcutter tried to make his wife change her mind, but after much argument, he reluctantly agreed to leave his children in the forest the following day. Meanwhile, Hansel had overheard his mother and father arguing. When he heard of their terrible plan, he crept outside, picked up some white pebbles, and put them in his pocket. Early the next morning, the woodcutter told his children that they must help carry the wood that he was going to chop down that day. As they walked deeper into the forest, Hansel began to drop behind him the pebbles he had collected. "What are you doing?" Gretel asked him. "Shh, you'll find out," replied her brother. After walking for many hours, the woodcutter told his children to rest while he started to cut down the trees. The children were tired after walking so far and slowly drifted off to sleep on the forest floor. When they awoke, it was night and very dark. They realised that their father had left them in the forest completely alone. "I'm frightened," said Gretel, clutching her brother's arm. "Don't worry," said Hansel. "Do you remember those white pebbles I dropped on the way here? If we follow them, they'll lead us home." Sure enough, the children followed the trail of white pebbles that gleamed in the dark, and they arrived home just as the sun had started to lighten the sky. Early the next morning, Hansel and Gretel's mother gave them each a chunk of bread and told them that they must help their father in the forest again. This time, clever Hansel tore off little bits of the bread and dropped them behind him as they walked along the path. Once again, the woodcutter urged his children to rest as he began his work. They were so tired they soon fell into a long sleep. When the children woke up, they realised that their father had left them again. "What are we going to do?" asked Gretel nervously. "We'll just follow the bits of bread," Hansel replied. But as hard as they looked, the children couldn't find any pieces of bread anywhere. "Oh no," cried Hansel, "the birds must have eaten it all." That night it was so cold the children walked around the forest trying to keep warm. As the sun started to come up, they saw a white bird in the sky that seemed to be beckoning to them. Having no other plan, they followed the bird, which led them to a little cottage. They were amazed to see that the cottage walls were made entirely out of bread. The roof was iced ginger cake, and the windows were made of sparkling sugar. Hansel and Gretel were so hungry they immediately began to tear bits of bread off the walls and ravenously started to eat it. Just then, a little voice rang out. "Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who's that nibbling at my house?" Then the door opened and a little old lady came out. Hansel and Gretel thought they might be punished for eating bits of her house, but the old lady simply smiled and said, "My goodness, you children must be so hungry. Come inside and I'll make you breakfast." The old lady made Hansel and Gretel a delicious breakfast. "Aren't we lucky to have found this kind lady?" said Gretel as she got into bed. But the kind old lady was not a kind old lady at all. She was, in fact, a horrible, nasty witch who enjoyed roasting children in her oven so that she could eat them. The next morning she locked Hansel in a large cage and told Gretel to cook food for her brother. "He needs fattening up before he's ready for my oven," she hissed. Each day the witch told Hansel to stick a finger through the bars so she could feel how fat he was getting. But Hansel was clever, and instead of poking out his finger, he stuck a little bone out to make the witch think he wasn't putting on any weight at all. After a month, the witch was getting impatient and decided to eat Hansel straight away. She ordered Gretel to make a fire in the oven, then told her to get into it to make sure it was hot enough. Poor Gretel knew the witch would close the door behind her and roast her as well. "I'm not very good at climbing into things. Could you show me how, please?" Gretel asked the witch. "Oh, all right," said the witch, who opened the door and crawled inside the oven to show exactly how it should be done. But when the witch was halfway in, Gretel pushed her all the way with a great shove and slammed the door shut behind her, and that was the end of a very horrible witch. Gretel released her brother from the cage and they searched the cottage for anything that might be useful. They were amazed to find that the cottage was crammed full of gold coins and precious jewels. They gathered it all up and left. After wandering for a very long time, they saw smoke rising from a chimney in the distance. They were overjoyed to see that it was their cottage. When their father saw his children were alive and well, he dropped his axe and hugged them close to him. When he saw the treasure that they had brought with them, he couldn't believe his eyes. They were rich. Although their cruel mother had died while they were lost in the forest, the children and their father lived happily together for the rest of their days. The end. Well, Hansel was very clever to make sure that he dropped things so that they could follow the path, but what a shame that they couldn't find the bread. But it's a good job that Gretel realised that she could push the witch into the oven first. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow for tomorrow's fairy tale. Take care!